I feel a little undone here. I can't wear my cross because it clanks on the microphone. I lost another cross a couple of months ago. It was made out of nails, and I was going to board an airplane, and the security check, they took it off me and measured it, and it was longer than 3 inches, and they had to take it off and wrap it in a manila envelope and hand it to the stewardess to give to me on my departure from the plane. It was a dangerous weapon. Potentially a dangerous weapon. So, but anyway, like I said in the prayer, it's going to be a little different. And they suggested in the car coming here, too, that it'd be good. Some of you suggested somewhere along the line that it'd be good to get some real interaction with the group. So I'm going to ask you to give part of this talk, the practical part, and I'm going to kind of lay this out here and then ask you really to enter in and see how this can be applied in a Christian way in your own life. And this is going to be kind of like an examination of conscience, only in a new way. So come at things and come at your life in a new way, not looking just for particular things that are wrong, but for a whole tendency so that we can open up, to the love of God. Last night, he talked about how love is a gift and it flows in, and then we have these obstacles, particularly a lack of forgiveness and a lack of love for others, and when it doesn't come out through us, then it doesn't come into us either. So I'm going to talk a bit about what happens to us by way of blocking the flow of love, and the 3 basic ways that we block this flow of love, and I'm going to ask you what to do about it. And I think that you will find that you are doing this. We're bound to be doing this in one of 3 ways, because they're very natural, human ways of doing it. And you might find that you're doing it in all 3. That's quite possible, too. But I mentioned last night how much we need love. God has made us in such a way that we need love to live. And because we're born into an imperfect world, somewhere along the line, all of us are going to be hurt. And the psychologists say that the most crucial time of our life is somewhere before we are 3 years old. Somewhere before we've ever made any kind of a decision for good or evil, for Christ or against him. We are completely dependent up to that time upon the other people around us. We're dependent upon the Christian community and how Christian that community is, especially our parents. Those churches that believe in infant baptism have sensed this all along, that a child can really be damaged. You don't wait till the person gets to be 15 years old before they make a decision for Christ. But the child is already moving in a certain direction. And the child comes in the face of the community. Just as John the Baptist was touched and left in his mother's womb, a child can be prayed for while it's still in the mother's womb and be deeply affected by God. And so it's a sense that this child is unprotected, and that we need to do something about that, which has been at the heart of, say, infant baptism in those churches that practice infant baptism. It isn't just what we decide, but it's God's grace, and how to open ourselves up to God's grace, and how to open up people who are not yet ready to make their own decisions. Because the basic thing is not what we do, but what God does for us. And the symbol of that is that the child is completely dependent upon the grown-ups, especially the parents, on which way it's going to turn. If there's love in the family and the family is accepting, the child has a tremendous head start. But if the child is not wanted in any way, and I know Barb has talked about inner healing here at this camp, if the child is not wanted in any way, somehow that's going to get through to the child too. Now, because we do come into an imperfect world filled with sin, the child, when you were a child, before you were able to fight, you had to make certain adjustments to the cruelty and the harshness of the world. You were smaller than the world. I remember back, when I was in grade school, made a whole lot of difference just that somebody was 2 months older than I was. You know how it was? Somebody weighed 5 pounds more than you did. He could beat you up, perhaps. If he's 2 months older, he's a lot wiser. If he's a whole grade ahead of you, it was like he's almost in another world. Remember those days? And so you're in a world of giants. I remember once praying for a man who's a CFO, a minister, about 60 years old. And he asked for prayer because he was terrified every time he got up in the pulpit. He was scared of his congregation. And even after 40 years of giving sermons to this congregation, every Sunday he was still shaking. And we tried to get back to the reason why, and he came up with a recurring nightmare that he had. And the nightmare was the same all the time. It was the first day of high school. And he'd gone to little country school for grade school where he knew everybody and they're friends of the family. Then he went to this big central high school. And the nightmare was his entrance into that high school. This long flight of stairs going up. And then there was this long, polished corridor with the lockers on either side. And he'd walk up in terror. He'd walk up these stairs, get up to that long corridor with the polished floor, and on all the lockers lining that wall were the big boys waiting to beat him up. And he'd start walking down, terrified. Somewhere along the line, they just all jump him, and he'd wake up. And so he needs to, prayer for what had happened to him way, way back. And here he was, about 55, 60 years old, still on Sunday morning, reliving that experience. Now, all of us had to make adjustments because we were faced with a world that we could not cope with because we were too small and too weak. And there are just 3 basic ways that we can adjust to a world that's stronger than we are. And so listen and see if you find yourself in one of these 3 ways. And these tend to last throughout life. The first way is perhaps the most hidden of all the ways. But the first way is, if you can't lick them, join them. And so because these people are larger and tougher and stronger, no matter what they say, smile and do it. Be the obedient child, no matter what. Polish the apple in class. Do everything they tell you to do and you will be rewarded. Nobody can get mad at you because you're always doing the right thing. So no matter what happens, smile. Go along with the group. Never fight. Now, by and large, that's a good thing to be obedient to parents and to go along with the will of the group. But there always will come a time when you know that you can't go along with something that's said or done, that you have to take the lonely stand and you have to fight, and you have to go alone, because you know that what's being said is wrong. I don't know how many of you followed the Watergate, but the former acting head of the FBI, Earl Gray, was on the stand, and it was really moving because he recognized this in himself. He's a very honest witness, I think. And he recognized this in himself, and he was saying, in such and such a time, I lied to Senator Weicker, and so forth and so on. And I'm sorry now that I did it. He's one of the few people who said who sees a moral dimension to this. I think you could see in the testimonies for some of the men to go along with the team that that's just the way things are. There's no sense of moral degradation. It's just the way things are. There's no sense. But for Patrick Gray, he knew that he was going along too far and that he lied to protect himself. Now that lying, to go along and to pretend that you're with the group and so forth, that's the thing. And they always said that about that man who seemed so strong, I remember. That he was in the Army, or in the Navy. He's a good Navy man, which means that no matter what the order is from on top, you obey it. But somewhere along the line, there always comes that time when what comes down the pike isn't the right thing. Then you have to make the decision. Now, some people are never able to stand up and fight. And they're always very pleasant and do the right thing, but somehow they are never themselves. And somehow when we do that, when we always go along, nobody else may know, but deep down within ourselves, we feel a shame about that because we're not listening to the sound of a distant drummer. We're afraid to listen to Jesus when he says, this is the way you go, even if everyone else turns against you. There are many times in our lives when we have to make those decisions. The first one I remember, I think I was in third grade. And I don't know how it was in your school. I think it's pretty much the same every school. There's kind of a leader of the group, the boys. They're the toughest boy. The boy can beat everybody else up at that age. And then he's got some kind of a lieutenants around him. And kind of goes in a particular order, and you know very well what that order is. Just like you know the dating order later in high school. You know what that order is. And then there are a few people who are favorite targets of anybody. You can pick on them, no matter what. They've got no friends, and the whole group converges. Now, this is not a Christian thing. It's just the way boys are. But I remember the leader of our group said, this guy that everybody picked on was named Cowtail. So I was late, and he was kind of fat and dumpy and wasn't too strong. He later turned out to be a great success in life, surpassed most of the other members of the class. But at that time, he was fair target. So we didn't have anything to do, and so the leader said, let's beat up Cow's Tail. Everybody said, yeah, let's beat up Cow's Tail. And Cow's Tail hadn't done anything, Sometimes he did something to make you annoyed, but he hadn't done anything. And I thought to myself, just a glimmering of conscience at that age, we don't have any right to beat up on Cow's Tail this time. He didn't do anything. And I didn't want to go along with the group, because that was wrong, But at the same time, you're afraid if you say something, they'll turn on you and say, hey, let's beat up on Frank. That's the way it is. But I thought to myself, and I said, I should say something. And I was about the third, if you could say that. So I said, we shouldn't beat up on Cow's Tail. He didn't do anything. And I didn't have any, I was shaking. I was scared. That was about all I had the courage to say. And the leader turned on me. But then, kind of like the second in command, he said, that's right. Cow's Tail didn't do anything. I think we should leave him alone this time. And then the leader saw that the group was turning against him, and we didn't beat up on Cow's Tail. Now, that may sound real simple. But that's the way it starts. Early in life, you come up with some situation like that where you know that the odds are against you if you talk out. And a lot of times you let a thing go by. And that gets ingrained, don't volunteer. And don't stick your neck out. Let somebody else do it. But inside, you know what happens to you. You're really ashamed of yourself as a human being for not fighting at those times when you have to go counter to the group. Now, there are a lot of people that just smile and say, sure, this is wonderful, and so forth. And there are a lot of Christian people that are like that. They're not bad people at all, but they're just not strong. They find it very difficult to take a conflicting position, to discipline, to do things that are hard. They just kind of go along with the crowd. And there's something like a sheep in every one of us, isn't there? Afraid to be different. Really afraid. If everybody else in the block has this kind of standard of living and does this and this, can you be different if you really feel it's right to be different? Can you really be different? I remember praying for another woman as CFO, or for a woman as a CFO, and it was not like there was anything special wrong, but it's like she never really found herself. It's like her life was kind of gray and dull, and she didn't know what was wrong. But what was wrong was she was brought up in a very proper home, very wealthy, aristocratic home, and she always had these things as children she was supposed to do. She couldn't go out and get dirty, play, and there's certain playmates that she shouldn't have anything to do with, which was most of the block and most of the school. A very high standard of deportment, because this is what you were supposed to do if you belonged to this class, and she was never herself. Never did anything which was really her own. She always lived according to what other people thought that she should be. And this kind of deportment is rewarded, isn't it? It's rewarded in the home, it's rewarded in the school, it's rewarded in the army, it's rewarded in the church. You rise much farther in the church if you don't create any way. Daniel Berrigan is never going to be made bishop. At least I doubt it very much. Sure, I won't either. It's not that I've been disobedient in any way, but it's just not the ordinary, moving along according to the set path. And the person who never speaks out in the group, who always goes along with the company policy, whatever that is, he's the guy who's going to go far. Now, how do we rationalize that as Christians? Say, in a Christian context, in a church, or in some other group, how do you rationalize that? One is that I'm a loving person. I always do what I'm told. I go along with the group. I'm a good, loyal team member. And for the good of the group, I always go along. I'm very obedient. I'm loving. I'm submissive. You'll never find anything in my life that's not completely loving and submissive. And so we rationalize as Christians who we are. Now the second group, they probably had a harder life and decided it wasn't worth doing that. But the second group was the very reverse. It's not, I'm going to join them, but if this is the way things are, I'm going to fight. And I'm going to get on top. The world is a jungle. And I'm going to get there on top, and I'm going to be up on top where nobody can get me. And there are a lot of kids, sometime in your life, probably were rebellious, a certain stage where you get rebellious. You decide you're really going to fight and get there on top. and you get aggressive, and you fight. And you hate the kind of people who are wishy-washy, who just go around smiling and doing that kind of thing. Now, as Christians, you recognize that you can't fight the way you did in third grade. You can't just take a guy out and beat him up in the alley. We just don't do that. And so, because we recognize this as unchristian behavior, we move off that a little indirectly, and we get aggressive in other ways. If I don't really feel, for instance, that people are for me and so forth, and I'm afraid of getting too close to anybody because I might be hurt, the way we usually handle it is, I'm going to get on top through my accomplishments. I don't think you really care for me. I feel pretty worthless inside. I've never known anybody who could really love me just for who I am. But I can really accomplish. For a boy, it would be maybe in the beginning, fighting, you know. The toughest kid on my block. Or I'm the best athlete, you know. Everybody's going to admire me because I made the A team, or I'm the star quarterback, or something like that. And I'm really going to work at it. I had great visions of becoming a baseball pitcher, and I used to practice for hours, throwing the ball to get control, throwing it against a point in the steps that I had all marked out. And the real reason for that was I really wanted to excel, you know, so people would take notice. And other kids, boys and girls, decide, well, I've got a brain, and if I study, if I go home at night, maybe I'm not the most popular kid in the class, but I go home at night, I'm going to really study, and I'm going to get the grade, get the scholarship, get called up on graduation. And other people who may be a little better looking than others, you know, we get our competition through dating, all that kind of thing. And we're all in this. It's like a big competition. And in our society, this is rewarded. From the time you begin, the time you end your life, you're rewarded for it. You got marks in school, and probably your father is saying, you know, you kid, you get those grades, or you're not going to make anything in life. Later, it's the kind of job you get. The kind of society I grew up in, I'd be ashamed to be a gardener. The family I'm from, you know, you wouldn't think of that. The education I've had. You can't be yourself. You're in this competitive rat race, and you're forced into it. One of the things last night, I thought it'd be really good to go out and pray with Tommy. I wanted to affirm him. And in our prayer, we discovered a strange thing. Really, really strange. He said that I wish I could remember exactly where he put it. It was something like he saw all kinds of qualities in me that he wished he had. And I thought, my gosh, you know. I wonder what those could be. You know, I was really kind of dumbfounded. Because the very reverse happened in me. When I hear Tommy talk, like yesterday morning, as far as I'm concerned, I could hear Tommy all week, see? And I say, you know, my gosh, if Tommy could give all 12 talks here, I'd willingly sit down there and listen to Tommy, all 12 talks, see? And I just don't feel like, well, I think if I had a choice between listening to Tommy and listening to myself, I'd listen to Tommy. And I found he was feeling something like the same thing to me, and I couldn't believe it. Now, I don't know whether Tommy can believe that other about me or not, but See, it's like we're forced into a competitive position, whether we want it or not. It's so much part of it that much as I love Tommy, and I'd rather work with Tommy than anybody else, I think. But there's that competitive thing that you're trying to get rid of all the time, but it's there saying, who's the best speaker? You know, what do the people think? And you think, no, that's not, no, get away from that. That's not right, you know, you got to be yourself. Well, I hear Tommy cracking those jokes and everybody laughing, and man, I got to develop some jokes here. And then I try some of those jokes some other place, and I recognize that Tommy can tell jokes that nobody else can, and everybody laughs. Why, he had a joke in the car that was the worst joke I ever heard. And everybody laughed. See, there's this kind of jealous thing in it, isn't there? Always comparing, always competing, because that's really in it. And it's in Christian homes, too. I've had to pray for a grown man who's a great success. But he deep down felt he wasn't much of a success because in high school, he was a B student. Now, that's not so bad, but he was in a family of A students. And everybody in his family got A, except him. And his father, I guess, was an A student. And so when he came home with his report card, it happened every time. His father would call him in and say, how come you're not like your brother? You stupid. And this was ground in on him over years and years. His father was telling him he was stupid in comparison with his brothers. And even though he made a great success later in life, he always felt deep down that he was a slob who just had compensated for it. And the truth of the matter was he was probably a C student. You know, worked very hard to get the C. But that was the stamp on him. You're not as good as your brother. We had a retreat in Florida not too long ago. And when we were talking about this, there was one freshman girl in college who said the previous year, her senior year in high school, the girls, 60 girls in class were ranked. Now, I don't know who did this. Maybe it was among themselves by a vote, and maybe it was from the faculty. But they were ranked on 40 points, including beauty. Well, suppose you were number 39 in the class, according to the estimate of all the other people who really knew you. You say, well, man, that must be true. I'm a real dog, you know. That's just the way things are. They voted me this. Popularity. Suppose you were number 40, popularity in the class. Voted that way by objective evaluation of all these other people. Now, what do you think that would do to the rest of your life? But that's the kind of society that we are in. We rank ourselves, and even in relation to God, we're always striving out for this sanctity, you know. Who's going to be the greater saint, or the super Christian? We're talking to a minister, Dick Mills, maybe some of you know him from the West Coast, and he said in his church, they held up these great men who'd given revivals. San Diego, 40,000. 3,000 of them accepted Christ that night. And all these great models were held up. See? So when you go out, you know, what are you supposed to do when you preach? You're in competition to all these other preachers. Can you get to 40,000? Can you get them to accept Christ? You begin to count numbers as they do it. Jesus only worked with 12. And he lost them, some of them. Now the third way if you're not going to go under and just agree to everything that's ever done around you, and if you're not just going to fight and get in this tremendous rat race to get on top, there's only one alternative to those two methods. And that's just to withdraw from this whole thing, one way or another. Just look at it. Maybe become a student and write a PhD thesis on it. There are a lot of ways of withdrawing. Might become a monk. Contemplative. Pray about it. Don't get in the fight, but just withdraw someplace. Withdraw to your home. Don't get involved. Prayer groups are great at doing this. A conflict develops within the group in some way, and somebody says, oh, this isn't of the Lord. I feel some tension here. Let's pray about it. Let's all sing a song. Let's stand up. Stand up, everybody. And this conflict that's developing on a real point that's got to be worked out. Zoom. Everybody praises the Lord. And finally they all go home, but the conflict is still there. Still there. There are a lot of ways that we have of withdrawing and escaping life. Some people are poets. Some withdraw into a world of music. Some drugs. Now this scene is bad, man. Let's just go off on a hilltop someplace. Develop our own little Christian community. Tommy was talking about that in relation to the church. Church is a bad scene. Let's talk to one friend down in Florida and ask him how he's doing. I haven't seen him for about 5 years. Yeah, he was a minister. And I asked him, what he'd been doing recently, and he said, I just founded my own little New Testament church down the road a piece. See? I'm sure he was really sincere, and it's really a great church, but it's like, well, that's what you do when the going gets rough. You start your own with a group of people you like, and there's a lot in me that says that's a great thing to have a community of people that you can really work with and love and trust. And we all need that, right? So those are the three ways that we have really of escaping, where Christianity has to be lived out in our lives. And there are a lot of subtle ways. I think you can recognize that any one of these points, especially the second, being a success, one way or another, is in all of us. And it affects our life together. When people start these great Christian communities, that second one surfaces in the form of ambition. And why is his husband chosen as leader of our group when mine is so much, it's there. We compete to see who's going to be the best. They say that the Hopi Indians don't allow this among their children. They won't give them grades, they won't do anything, because they want them to work as a community rather than to compete. In the Latin American culture, they don't allow as much competitiveness in this way. They've tested this out on children. And when children from the United States are tested in a particular game, which if both people fight, you can't win, neither one can win. The only way anybody can win a prize is by letting go and letting the other kid win. They found that United States kids would rather fight than let the other kid get the prize. While kids of Latin American descent say, well, you win this time, I'll win this the next time, and we'll all get a prize. But children from the United States would rather fight and not have anybody win. There's a real difference. There's a real difference. Now, I'd just like to ask for your reflections on this. Suppose we start with the second. Our competitiveness, our desire to fight and get up on top where other people are going to admire us. How do you handle this as a Christian, since it's so much a part of our life, of your life? Have you thought of that? How do you work with that, especially when the society's around? Frank? It could be. It could be. Sure. It's hidden. That's the thing for Christians. It's usually masked. You know, like how many people did you pray for? You know, how many people have you led into the church? And then a big contest. Like for grade school kids, giving money to the mission. And then you rank them. Class number 7th grade brought in $252 for the mission. 6th grade, 182. And it can really be a mixed thing. I find it's really hard to say no, to tell you the truth, when somebody asks for prayer, to say no. And I know that if I said yes to everybody, I'd be absolutely wiped out, and I know that we have to say no to some people. And the only way to figure that out is to try to pray about it and say, no, Lord, which should I say yes to and which should I say no to? And I know in service sometimes that number one thing gets in there. I want to agree with everybody and not hurt anybody. Or have them think that I'm bad, you know, because I say no. So somebody calls up and they say, can't you pray for me? Can I come over? Please, just for 1 hour. And I have a hard time saying no. And the reason I have a hard time saying no is because I like to agree with everybody and have them all friends. That's another way that service gets messed up. If I serve people, mostly, not because of Christ, but mostly because I want to be admired and have everybody love me because I'm serving them all, that can be a form of making them dependent on me. Not freeing them. Not being honest enough to say, no, I'm sorry, I'd like to, but I just can't. I don't care what you think about me, but I can't. But maybe somebody else can pray for you better than I can. In my experience, there are not too many Christians who will say, when you ask them to pray for you, to pray about it kind of quickly and say, well, I think you should go to somebody else who really has a gift in this area. I find most evangelists, you know, who give these big services and people come forward and they pray for everybody, which is fine, but I don't see them referring people usually to someone else. I see the beginnings of that, thank God. For instance, homosexuality is the kind of thing most people don't seem to want having to do with. So I've gotten some references at score. People from all over the country nobody else will pray with. And they've heard that we have prayed and there's been some success in this area. And so they're referring, which is great. What I would like to see is that we really operate as a whole body of Christians, recognize the gifts that other people have and draw those out. I think there's a tradition, especially in the Protestant churches. Now, I'm not saying this to extol the Roman Catholic Church, because we got a lot of problems. They're kind of the reverse of this. You know, a lot of our ministers are kind of faithless. You know, they go through these things, and the minister, the priest doesn't get into it with his whole self. But I think in the Protestant churches, with the idea of, the great preacher, how many people go to this church and how many people go to that church and all that stuff, he kind of feels he's got to do the whole bit. And he's afraid to refer people out to others, because then he's not doing his job and he's not extolling this particular church that he's attached to. So he may get in the service business for the... Part of it is right. This is true of most of us, isn't it? It's a mixed bag. We're doing the right thing, but partly for the wrong reason. And I've got to be willing to say, well, I'm just incompetent in this area. Or somebody else is more competent, and I can't do it all. That's one of the reasons I really enjoy the CFO, with working with people like Tommy Tyson and Barb Sleeman and so forth. We work as a team. We're not just three speakers or two speakers.
What I'm saying is we have no competition for it.
He's going back to a camp we had in Nebraska a couple of years ago, and he introduced me, and I said, it's such a great delight talking with Tommy. What I was trying to say was there's no competitive spirit here, to speak of. And I say, it's really great to talk with Tommy, because when I talk with Tommy, there's no competition. Does that help at all? I guess it is. C.S. Lewis mentions this. I think it's in the Screwtape Letters about the mother who's always of service to her children. And she's so anxious to be of service, you can't get rid of her. And when you go out on a date, he says that, she wants so much to help you and to dress the girl and make sure, give you all these last-minute instructions. And then when you come home, she's waiting up at night, no matter when it is you get in. And if it's late, she's looking there with her frail, complaining face, but not saying anything, just looking at you. So service can be a way of getting on top of people in an aggressive way and dominating them. Holding on, hanging on. Yeah. Now that's a really good question about conflict. And the question was, how do you handle conflict in the Christian group? If you're at all honest, there's bound to be conflict in the home, in the church. No matter where you are, there's bound to be conflict. And you're going to have different ideas, and not only different ideas, but people are going to be hurt just because we're human and we're living together. And how do you handle that? I think that's such a good question that maybe we should discuss that whole thing as a group the next time we get together. Because I've only heard one talk that I know of on anger. Dave Rhodes, whom we know, young Lutheran minister, gave a beautiful talk on anger. Now, the way most Christian groups handle anger is to say it's bad. It's bad. You're getting emotional now, and it's bad. That's part of my training, very, very strongly, I know, as, I'm a Dominican priest, which means I'm an order priest like Jesuit or Franciscan, and we have an ideal of living together in community. And that was a large part of the way I felt about myself, that I couldn't get angry in a group or it would destroy a community. So I think that's such a good question that maybe instead of trying to cover it in 5 minutes, because so few groups, as I see it, handle it adequately. Maybe we can get other people, too. We have a kind of a talk where a lot of people really enter in. I'm sure Jim Parker over here, his experience in community, has some ideas about that one. How do you handle conflict? Because conflict isn't bad. And anger isn't bad. Jesus got angry, didn't he? He overthrew the temple, the money changers' tables and scattered all the money out and let the doves go. Now, if I ever went in a church and did that, I'd be in trouble. And he was. But I don't know that I'd even have the courage to do that. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Jesus Christ Superstar. I think it's pretty good. But that one scene of his entering in the temple and throwing over the money changers' tables. No, there are things that are weak in the movie, like it's not too clear why he was, what his great vision and ideal was. There are things that are weak, but what it does, the humanity of Jesus really comes through. And he's not a weak, wishy-washy person. He's very natural, very honest, very open. He's very moving. But when you get him overturning those tables, and he was mad. No, he didn't just do it, going through, It mentions, many times outside of that in the gospel, he was moved, to his very depths when he went to the tomb of Lazarus, and he heard about his friend being in there and decaying. So, a groan came up way down. I don't know what it sounded like. Just imagine what that must have been like. A groan from his very depths came out. Now, he probably knew he was going to raise Lazarus. What was that groan all about? About the sadness of the human situation where this happened. And Lazarus was his friend. It might be good for us to look into the gospel and see all the times that Jesus was angry. And he had a lot of enemies. And he made them. I mean, it wasn't just like he's going around preaching, but, you call anybody a group of vipers, you're likely to have a few problems. He didn't skirt the problem, did he? He went right through. So suppose we talk about that, because that's such a good question. That's good. He was asking, what do you do about somebody who feels that winning is such a big thing that if he loses, something of him dies a little? I think we'll get to that too later, because what really is involved is inner healing. If that's really deep in us, if that's part of our life, the way I see life is it's a competition, then we need inner healing on that score. A lot of that's drilled into football players, isn't it? I was just reading about probably the outstanding football prospect in the St. Louis area in high school. The big guy is about 6'6", and he weighs already 240 pounds, and he's going to the University of Illinois, and they had an interview with the kid. And he said he doesn't have much social life, doesn't have time for social life, and they asked him, well, how does he get his enjoyment out of life? He said, oh, I just enjoy beating on people. He said, I go in there and practice my hit, Well, he's 6'6" and weighs 240 in high school. Not likely to meet much problem there. He can enjoy himself to the fullest. But somewhere along the line, he's going to have problems if he doesn't develop more than that. There's something healthy, I think, in that. But there's also this unhealthy aspect. One football coach was asked about his winning philosophy, and they said, it's claimed that you say that winning is a major part of football, not sportsmanship. He said winning isn't a major part of football. He said it's everything. Well, if you have that atmosphere and you lose, I felt that from time to time, when I lost in sports or something, it really used to get me. Brood about it. But there's something in that that's really unhealthy because you tend to look at other people as competitors, size them up. In whatever field you're in, like that girl in high school, girls look at each other to see, who's the most popular. In high school, you've got the whole dating order. You know the people you can invite, you can ask out, and you probably know the ones you can't because they'll say no because they regard themselves, how that goes. And it's all through our society. What's said about the poverty programs in the United States? Let those people work for it. I did. Life is a competition. I worked for it. Those lazy bums, on ADC. And meantime, just look at the priorities in our country, what we spend on bombing people and on offensive weaponry, and what we do to help the poor to help themselves. Now just compare it and see what kind of society we've got. We've got a really aggressive society. And we're all affected. And it's not Christian. If anybody among you wants to be the greatest, let him be the servant of all. We're supposed to be foot washers. Not looking for the first place at the synagogue or for the first place at CFO. And it's really hard to get out of that, isn't it? But we've got to be healed in order to love one another. Because as long as you're a competitor of mine, I can't love you completely. I can admire you because you've got qualities I don't have. But I can't love you. Yeah. I think there's healthy competition. But I try to read as much as I can, because this is really all part of Christianity. It's not like Christianity is just praying. But on the plane on the way here, I read an article about corporation executives and, the idea of being really wedded to the corporation. And if you're going to move higher in some corporations, you got to work more than the 8 hours a day. You really got to eat, sleep, work all the time fully, 16 hours a day, to reach the very top in some of these corporations. And the people who suffer, of course, are the wives and children. The men somewhere along the line have to make a decision in those corporations, which is more important to me, the corporation or my family. Am I willing to level out here at this level, take this degree of salary, and really devote my time to the family, or does this other mean more to me? There's a lot of that. And that's something really that we as Christians should be concerned about. I'd like to call attention to the fact that in our midst is Father Paul Schaff, who's been a missionary in Chile for I don't know how many years. But the whole Latin American attitude is based on a lot of different values, which we as North Americans tend to look down on. They're never on time. They never work. All these stereotypes. But if you look at it another way, maybe they have a higher sense of that. The human thing, the family, being with the family, and enjoying talking with them. See? Not the big success thing, but the more human thing of being with people and loving people. To them is very important. And if you're going to mess all that up with a schedule and have to get here, and they don't understand that. And it really helps to have this mixture of cultures so you can understand from outside some of our own weaknesses that we're too blind to see. But this is important, and we don't recognize in a lot of ways how unchristian we are until someone points it out. It'd be really interesting if Jesus were here. He didn't have any programs. He just walked around, spent a lot of time talking with people. Never set up any organization at all. Spent long nights praying alone. Would take the 12 out someplace beyond Israel just to get away from people. Other times he's praying with people all day long. Never wrote really very much. Nothing. When you look in there for a body of doctrine that you could kind of put together, it's really hard to do it. A lot of things he didn't seem to do very efficiently. You know, think of what a corporation director could do if he had Jesus working for him, you know, in a church. How he tried to change him. But think about these things, because these are real questions that we as Christians have to go into, and the Spirit really has to help us, because there are no clear guidelines. Each one of you men working in your job, the Spirit really has to show you how to make your work Christian, because we are living in an unchristian atmosphere. I think the Watergate, I knew it was unchristian, but I didn't know it was that unchristian. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you that you are real, that you were a man like us, and that you faced a lot of difficult questions in your day, that you were living in a time of great political unrest, that you faced a lot of opposition from religious authorities. People didn't understand you, including your own men. And we thank you that you've given your Holy Spirit to enlighten and guide us in those areas that are not covered by a blueprint. We thank you that you are a guide, not a map. And Jesus, we know we need your help because we don't have a map. And so, Jesus, be our guide. Amen.